So I'm going to start very quickly presenting us. Thank you again for being present and available for our extractivism talks, which we are Extractivism project. We are collaborative research projects of the universities of Kassel and University of Marburg here in Germany. We are funded by the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research. And our project investigates natural resource extractivism in both Latin America and the Maghreb region. Within our project, we scrutinize many crisis scenarios, socio-economic contexts, and resilience and transformative potentials for development for countries that they have a traditional socio-economic development based on extractivism in those two both essential, crucial regions of our world politics. In a sense, we don't do simply research on those two regions, but we want to do research with the two regions. And that's why we organize events such as these. The idea of extractivism talks is to bring researchers from the topic within a bigger audience, or at least an audience that is not that used to those topics. Therefore, we invited you three for discussing Peru today. So Peru it's one of our study cases in our project, as it is the second world production of copper and a candidate for becoming future lithium and hydrogen producer. But since December, the international spotlight has shined towards Peru due to massive protests that erupted, now due to impeachment and the arrest of Peru's first campesino president, Pedro Castillo. The protests began on the southern Andean region, where the rural indigenous people have long felt excluded from a lot of extractivist activities that happens there. But it quickly overtook the capital and other urban centers of the country, exposing the overall dissatisfaction with the Peruvian people with the current state of affairs in the country. In this sense, we invited three professors from the regions to discuss Peru, many contradictions, social tensions, and inequalities, which make us characterize this country also as an extractivist country. And we are asking we ask you three to interlink the current tension, the current crisis, with the fact that Peru has been stuck in extractivism development model for decades. Castillo was elected under the promise of nationalizing the mining industry, rewriting the constitution, improving the life of poor rural people, which he has been linked to. But inflation, political scandals, disputes with the Congress, with a high opposition, basically have been increasing more and more than dissatisfaction. But we believe, the Extractivism Project, and we hope that our speakers can share this view with us, that while corruption and political struggle are essential to grasp the current situation in the country, a full picture is visible if we stress that this model of extracting and exporting raw materials create particular socioeconomic dynamics that provoke cyclical crises such as this one. With no longer ado, I'm going to introduce you very quickly and give you the word. First of all, we have Roger Merino. Roger has been a fellow researcher here with us already last summer. He is associate professor at Public Management School in Universidad del Pacífico in Lima, Peru. He has a PhD in social and political science and a master in international politics in the University of Bath in the UK. He was a visiting scholar in Harvard's University Institution, Global Laws and Policy, and his research interests are political ecology, environment governance, and indigenous rights. He has published in many leading journals. You can read more about him even on our extractivism page in the profile of our fellows, including an interview that we did with him. Most recent publication I extract here too: Conflicting Sovereignties, Global Conservation, Protected Areas, and Indigenous Nations in the Peruvian Amazon, published by Global Environment Politics, and Extractivism Constitutions, Constitutional Change and Development Path in Latin America, at Law and Development Review. Second, we have Maritza Paredes. She's a senior lecturer in the Department of Social Sciences Sociology section at the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. where she is also the director of the PhD in sociology. Her specialty is political and environmental sociology, and she researches and publishes on environment and subnational conflicts and mobilization in relations to the governance and extractivist industries, climate change, illegal commodities, and indigenous people. She holds a PhD from Oxford University and a master from Columbia University. I have here co-authorship publications that I stress here. One is Peru 2019, Crisis Política y Salida Institucional de la Revista de Ciencia Política. And also another co-authorship, New Institutionals, Old Practice, the Weakening of the New Environment Constitutions, Control Institutions in Peru. Finally, we have José Carlos Orihuela. José Carlos studied what are institutions, how they change, and why they matter for the economic and environment, with a focus on Peru and Latin America. His research has been published in many journals of political economy, institutional economies, and comparative international development. He's a I'm so sorry, my notes are a little bit messy, but he has a PhD in Columbia and has MP, EDP, Harvard, and a bachelor on PUC in Lima. From publications, I stress here two. One, in co-authorship, Extractivism of the Poor, Natural Resource and Commodification, and its Discontents, the extractivist, published at Extractivist Industries and Society. And another one, Institucionalidad Ambiental Minera entre el discurso legal y las prácticas de gobierno, published in a book entitled Oportunidad Perdida, Boom Extractivo y Cambios Institucionales en Perú. With that said, I think we can pass the word accordingly to the presentations that I did. So I'll pass the word first for Roger, and then we continue to Maritza and José Carlos. One more time, thank you so much for participation. Roger, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luisa. Thank you all for your attention. Luisa, I would like to share some slides, and now I cannot see the option to share.
Should be down, no?
Okay, let me check. No, that is.
It should be the green button.
In theory, is read.
Yeah, that should be, but I have not the option here.
Yes.
Okay, is there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to start with some ideas about what is going to happen next and what is happening right now in Peru. So interpretation. This title is just a very preliminary title, and I have no a better idea of how to call this interpretation that I am trying to do between extractivism and democracy. So just to understand the situation, I think we need to know that we are living two legacies today from previous authoritarian moment in the country: the economic legacy of Fujimori and the authoritarian legacy of Fujimori. All we know the history of neoliberalism in Peru. Fujimori implements privatization policies, the flexibilization of legal standards for promoting mining, oil, agribusiness. So that is a neoliberal moment in Peru.
Roger?
Yeah.
1 second. Is your slide supposed to be showing something? Because it's white for us.
Really?
So, yes, I'm so sorry.
So let me check again. Okay. Now it's fine?
Yeah, now it's showing.
Yeah, great. But that's that's it. So it's Fujimori economic legacy and Fujimori authoritarian legacy. So on the authoritarian side, we know that the counter-terrorist policy of Fujimori means the persecution of political leaders, paramilitary action, and so on and so forth. And with the transition in 2000, the transition government of Paniagua, the idea was to remove this authoritarian legacy with a strong focus on human rights. So we have the Commission of True Commission and the report in 2003. And on the economic side, there was a promise, the promise to change the constitution to a new one. But in the end, this promise never was fulfilled because the economic sector were very comfortable with the pro-market constitution enacted by Fujimori, and they felt that a new constitution would risk the free market principles that the Fujimori's constitutions strongly recognized. So the economic legacy was like something that never changed. The next governments built their economic policies on Fujimori's economic legacy and deepen extractivist activities in the whole country. But the authoritarian legacy, I think, that remains at the margins of the state and the margins of the capital. And I will explain this just in a moment. So I can say that extractivism in Peru is a kind of low-intensity authoritarianism. Why? Because in those places where extractivism is developed, the state needs to discipline the people with legal anti-democratic mechanism. So we have, and this is a data that we all know, the social conflict in Peru is simply one of the most, the biggest in the region. We have around 190 social conflict in the last 15 years. 70% of the social conflicts are related to extractive industry. And at the same time, we have the state of emergency decrease, which is something that is very surprising because they just increase in the years, the number of decrease, and this decrease means the suspension of basic rights and liberties in those areas and freedoms in those areas. The right to reunion, the right to free expression, the right. So those are suspended in those areas where some social conflicts are critical, you know. And in these cases, we are talking about 280 decrees of a state of emergency related to social conflicts and socio-environmental conflicts in the last 18 years, or from 2000 and 2018. It's 217. So this is a high number of decrees of emergency in the mining corridor, for example. It is in Cusco, Apurímac, in these areas. And another idea that I would like to share is that extractivism is also racism in Peru, at least, and how it works in Peru. I'm taking some ideas of Cherem Razak about that places becomes race, place becomes race, sometimes because we embed racist imaginaries within specific territories. And if we see the decrease, for example, and the days that freedoms and rights has been suspended, so this is something that we should be concerned about. In Cusco, we had 17 decrees of emergency and 7,800 days of suspension of rights and freedoms. This is a huge amount of time in just 18 years, from 2000 and 2018. So we have these days in which people have no general rights of freedom, liberty, free of expressions, reunion, manifestation. These rights were just suspended in these specific territories, in Cusco, Huancavelica, Ayacucho, Junín, Huánuco, Cayali, San Martín. So these areas were object of this decrease. So we have this territorial differentiation, and at the level of which ideas we have to this sector, to this social sector. And what is the common idea? The idea is that the only recognizable and acceptable demand for these people is poverty alleviation. As the president today, just 2 days ago said, okay, if people want to protest, so they should protest because of they are poor, they need public services, and the technocrats in Lima said, well, the problem is the local government, that they don't know how to deliver social services and infrastructure. So the only recognizable and acceptable demand is poverty alleviation. So they either they are poor and they must be satisfied with the promise of an effective government, or they are rebels, and as such, they are a terrorist threat. So this is the racist imaging that the states and some sectors in the society and in the state have on this mobilization. So they have two options: or ask for a better state public policy for poverty alleviation, or they are terrorists, so we have to eliminate them. So this kind of imagination, what has mean in terms of human rights? For example, in the last 2 months, the departments with majoritarian indigenous populations concentrate 80% of the total death registered since the start of the current crisis. In 2 months, we have around 60 people dead in protests, 60 to 70. 80% are from these areas, which are indigenous and rural areas. So there is a correlation between the territory, the indigenous people living there, rural people living there, and the level of aggression of the state to these people. So what are the features of this kind of extractive democracy? This is the name that I choose, just I have a better one right now. We have a human rights deficit, constantly human rights deficit, and territorially differentiated. In those places, extractive places, in political ecology we call sacrificial places, the rights are suspended, and the more people that die are from protests are from these territories. So there is an imbalance of how we organize and respect human rights. There is a deficit of representation at subnational level. In Peru, 25% of the people consider that we are from indigenous origins, so 25%. But in the Congress, indigenous people have no representation, no specific representation. The laws only requires the parties to put on the list some indigenous people to compete for the election. Maybe they can be elected, but there is no specific seats in the Congress for indigenous people, so they are underrepresented. And in regional governments or local governments, they have no tools to implement policies that can satisfy many of the indigenous demands. For example, on rural demand, for example, the regional government of Cajamarca tried to approve regional ordinance, regional regulations on the protection of water sources. And the national government just went to the judges and then to the tribunal, the Constitutional Court, to null these ordinances. And the same with the regional government of San Martin and Loreto. These governments approved an ordinances that recognized indigenous nations in these regional governments, but the national governments went to the courts, to the Constitutional Tribunal to null these ordinances and said that the regional and local governments have no competencies to approve this kind of regulation. So there is no way, no political or institutional way to have a complete representation of rural and indigenous people. And there is a governance, democratic governance deficit because the national government just try to not establish democratic channels with these subnational governments and social movements. The idea is that they should be happy with the canon, which is the extractive rent that these governments have directly from extractive activities. So this canon is like the only thing that the national government owns to this subnational government. So they should, they have to know how to organize themselves with the canon, but there is no national and subnational planning system to understand, to dialogue and to establish common goals. There is a lack of democratic governance in this sense. And finally, there is a latent autocracy, a potential autocracy, because obviously we have all these deficits. And well, it happened in Peru with Castillo when there is a promise of representation of this interest, and this was just a promise because Castillo didn't have a specific social or environmental or post-extractivist or redistribution agenda. It was a promise of representation, but this was enough for these rural sectors to defend Castillo, and it was enough for these centralist sectors and technocracy to refuse Castillo. This promise of representation. Castillo didn't touch the economic, monetary policy or the basic economic fundamental of the country. But this promise of representation was enough to try to remove him from the very beginning of his mandate. And this is why I think this is a very particular democracy that has been existing at the edge of the human rights and democratic fundamental. So this is the last slide. The violence of extractivism passed from being symbolic, marginal, and localized, which is what happened in the last 20 years, to be open and generalized. So this is authoritarianism with no adjective, is what we are living just today. These are my general ideas on this. So thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer some questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Roger. I think we can pass the word straight to Maritza. And yes, you have the floor. You are not unmute.
No, thank you.
Yes.
I was saying that I'm not presenting a PowerPoint, but I'm focusing my presentation on mobilization mainly. I'm reflecting lately on this crisis from the mobilization process. And second, I will say less, but I think important about the response of the political elites and the relation with extractivism along my ideas. In my view, we are experiencing a very challenging and complex social dynamic, I think. From the perspective of mobilization, I see it very diverse and fragmented in its composition, what is not new in Peru. But I think it's worth to try to list which are these different demands and claims. And we can recognize from posters, news, and all the empirical work we can do and gather that there are organizations that have been supporting Castillo from the beginning with profound demands. They are the ones who mostly also call and demand for a new constitution and dispute also Castillo's attempts of committing a self-cap. Others have a relation with Castillo, as Roger just said, which is inspiration, a hope for representation, as Castillo being like them, and there is, or it is required a lot of unpacking in this expression in a country with proof historical discrimination and racism against indigenous and campesino peasant people, which I'm not going to do here. But they then feel that this hope has been stalled, has been banished, and consider Dina Boluarte a usurper. There is also a large proportion we can see of organizations and above all citizens who are tired just of the way that politics is done in the country, and who are sharing the slogan that everyone must go and new elections. But we also see a lot of vandalism in the protests. And I make this point because there is a lot of discussion about the violence of protests in Peru. Some have accused the police of infiltration, which seems to be true lately. But at the same time, considering that these acts of vandalism were since the very beginning part of the protest, I tend to doubt that the Peruvian police has the organizational capacity to react as quick, to be the only one responsible for this violence. I will think that violence in Peru around mobilization and conflict has been rather present since the past. And I agree with Roger that together with the way that the government has deal with conflicts, especially extractivist conflicts in Peru, we have a record of 60 fatal victims and more than 1,800 injured people from these conflicts. Once I was trying to make a comparison with other mining countries about this kind of, or these numbers, I was surprised that in Chile in the last 20 years, in the records, they only had one fatal victim from environmental conflicts, and we had 60. This is also a very dependent and extractivist model, which has been implemented in Chile. So there is something about the way that conflicts have been handled, especially extractivist conflict in Peru. And I think Roger has expanded a little bit more about on it. I just want to go back to the idea of the complexity of these demands and the complexity to abort and to address these demands. Obviously, new elections are an easy common target because will put us back in the same uncertain position that we were in the past. Also, in my idea, the growing demand for a new constitution, when no details are discussed, is also a thing that has been articulating some people. However, the recent constitutional results in Chile are a good example that the growth of these demands does not have to let us believe that the preference for constitutional changes go in the same direction. So I think demands continue fragmented and they don't solve the complexity that is going on among society. What I wanted to say as well is that extractivists have produced the same kind of complexity for mobilization in the last 20 years. We didn't have only one kind, a similar type of conflict related to extractivism. I've been studying mining for a while, and in a recent paper, I tried to make sense of the different claims and demands of different communities with respect to mining. And what I found is that these demands have been growing apart in many cases. Differences are often embedded in local histories that we tend to miss in favor of seeing larger tendencies, which is right, but also don't observing these differences mislead our interpretations. Some deeply oppose extractivism, and this has been the conflict we have cared more about and have reached international audiences. Others prefer to negotiate with companies, which doesn't eliminate conflict and violent conflict. Others become used to a life of contamination and accommodate their demands. I even have found and write about how conflict become toxic for the communities themselves and create internal problems, internal conflicts, and therefore less strong opposition or capacity for negotiation with companies. So communities and leaders have also tend to miss, I think, at the national level or regional level in extractivist conflicts, the common problems they face. And this leads me to a second problem related to the actual crisis and the shape that this mobilization has. If you make a list of organizations that are leading mobilizations today, we find Frentes de Defensa or defense fronts, which articulate rural and urban population, regional branch of the Confederación Campesina del Perú, the oldest peasant union. You have also a lot of individual peasant communities coming into the mobilization, representing their communities, university students. There are also other organizations like the Ronderos, and sometimes they don't represent the national union, but branch or local branch of this organization. So the Peruvian paradox on society is this huge local dynamic mobilization, and at the same time, very little capacity to unify and to articulate some demands and common claims. And this is not new, and I'm not saying nothing new. The literature has talked a lot about why Peru doesn't have a strong indigenous movement and has made responsible for this the armed conflict in the 70s and 80s because it cut off networks of communication and solidarity. Definitely, I think racism and the heritage of the Shining Path have helped elites to stigmatize and discriminate against peasants' organizations, and we are seeing how it works right now. However, at the same time, if you study mobilization from the perspective of the territories, you see that in more than 20 years, in extractive conflicts, we have not seen the capacity and willingness of articulate a more cohesive movement. There has been a lot of mobilization and dynamics, but no horizontal articulation or very weak horizontal articulation. Perhaps it has not been needed as NGOs and international audience has been able to be reached by vertical articulation as the international NGOs' interests grows when it's related to environmental issues and extractive industries. But this is also a legacy, a society legacy that we should not miss in the whole picture. And here to explain this, I think I have more questions than answers, but I think has to do with the bond between society and politics. And I think this bond, and this, I don't have an answer for this, but invite us to understand what kind of citizenship is the neoliberal extractivism producing today in Peru and elsewhere in Latin America, because extractivism is not only a phenomenon in Peru. So Peruvian society is very different today than it was at the beginning of the 90s, thanks to the extractivist model, even in rural society. I will say that people have improved their living conditions. They have more technology and information, bad or good information, improve their homes. When you ask, they feel they are better off than their grandparents. Furthermore, they have been promised not only democracy, but equality before the law, and that extractivism will bring monetary well-being. Yet, at the same time, you find answers of increasing vulnerability, facing debt. Many families in extractive areas are in debt, and social insecurity. They have not solved the problem of education, health, and equality before the law, remain unfulfilled promise. So under a model of withdrawal of the state, people have learned to carry all this weight, all this uncertainty, debt, inequality under their own shoulders, or in extractive areas, constantly demanding to the mining company at hand solutions, which use this need to clientelize communities instead of finding permanent solutions, as the state is almost no operative in these areas. So these are no happy undertakings for people, for this little enterprise of mobilization and demands. They do carry a cost, anguish. Katia Araujo in Chile said that this neoliberalism causes stress on people, physical, psychological stress. And what I will add, deep and increasing distrust in the collective solutions, where it goes beyond the familiar or to the close group. So what I want to say is that it's not that people in Peru have no mobilized, have no articulate politically, do not want to find political solutions. The problem is that they only trust their closer circle. Even when they have been in Lima, we have to try to understand how they can organize in Lima to mobilize. They don't trust different groups coming from different areas or different territories. So his distance from politics is not complete, but the relation with democracy, I think, in society today in Peru is ambivalent. Partly, there is distrust in what this democracy can do for them, and partly because they find that they can do it by themselves without the state as well. So I think also, I promised to talk about the response of the state to this mobilization. I think it has followed a very old path and has been authoritarian, racist, and in many cases, we can say ignorant. I think stable political regimes look for building bridges to authority, and authorities are able to extend to social movements and mobilize actors some arena, political arena, to negotiate. There is no indicator that authorities want to do this right now. It's not an easy task as this fragmentation, but I think at the bottom of this, and the capacity of doing this, of not extending breaches for talking, is the support of other part of the society. I think there has been a strong support in Lima as well for the measures of the government, and we cannot ignore that. And I think that support that divides Lima and big cities, populations living in big cities, from the rest of the population is also a legacy of extractivism in Peru. As extractivism in Peru is not only part of the neoliberal era of Peru, but is also part of the construction of the national state of Peru since very, very early in its history. And I think because of this extractivist dependency, extractivists never have need the construction of the state, will said my professor Rosemary Thor. So we have a very weak state, but on the bottom of that is also there has not been need for representation of these areas. So what we have here, and the racism and the stigmatization and the support for this racism and stigmatization that shock us today and we see in Lima, is also based in a way that people don't see racism based on difference, but based on the need of differentiation. What I want to say is that it's not the political or the color difference or the ethnic difference, but the need to differentiate those who were able to make it, to arrive to Lima, to be part of the model, to be in the model, and those who are not. And those who are not, then, if they protest, no, they can be stigmatized as ignorance and terrorists are violent. So I choose to talk about mobilization and not the political crisis or the politicians, because despite all my solidarity with the protests today, I'm afraid that society is also part of the problem. And what is broken is the bond between politics and society that sustain good governance. And the society model proposed by the neoliberal extractivism as a system has to do a lot with this break. And we need to understand much better what people are thinking, what is triggering their actions, and what is preventing them from linking and to pass the bridge into politics. I think mechanisms such as equal participation, like the free priority consult for indigenous people and other progressive reforms have actually no work in practice, of the state didn't want to work in practice. We can discuss that. But I think the society is something that is also in a crisis, although we see today is mobilization. And we need to look at the big picture, trying to understand the problems in the political sphere, but how these problems are connected to the problems in the society sphere. And I think we can learn a lot from what society has been doing around extractivism to understand all these dynamics and problematic situation. I will leave there to questions and discussion.
Thank you, Maritza. Great talk. So let's pass to Jose Carlos, please, and then we can open the floor to start our discussions.
Thank you. I think I'm going to be short because Roger and Maritza have already touched most of the points. So I'm rethinking what to say, so not to be repetitive. But yes, I think it's political economy what we are witnessing. No, it's political economy at work. So it's the economic intermixed, interlinked with the political, And I understand this as the context in which a political process takes place. So are we watching now the crisis of the model, whatever we call the model, or the extractivism itself? Well, yes and no, because it's part of, you cannot understand Peru without understanding its context and its big structures, as my colleagues were referring. And at the same time, but the context at which we had a very bad government by Castillo, and a right that has radicalized in Peru and wants to go Trumpista or Bolsonaro. We don't need actually external references, because Fujimori itself is a case of that extreme right, global extreme right. No, and so we have now diverse Fujimorismos with and without Fujimori. No, so and that force would make the life of a president of the other spectrum miserable, no matter whether the presidency was good or bad, no, well, competent or incompetent, no, radical left or center left. It's all the same for them. They are all terrorists. So you cannot control that. That's part of the political environment at which Peru these days has its politics. But it did happen that Castillo made a very bad government, and that, I think, alienated also parts of society that are not as political, that because of fear, no? So this is also very important, I think, to consider when we talk about political economy and why things go in one direction or the other, to think about process. So political economy as the big context, but then understanding processes. I think fear is a bit a great mobilizer, a great trigger of conduct, not individual and collective. And this rise of Peruvian fascismo needs to be thought in those terms, the fear, which again is not the first time it happens. Is fear, and of course it has to do with also deep historical divides of exclusion and that kind of psychology that not only elites, but say an average poor middle class limeño, no? Like, I mean, I'm not a wealthy limeño, but I live in mesocratic neighborhoods. I was in Miraflores for a while. Now I'm in Magdalena, and you talk to people, and even in the markets. You also, I go to the market in Magdalena, and people, you will be shocked by how the pendulum has gone so much to the right. Not that everyone is a right winger these days, but you can be reading the newspapers in the market, and you hear people saying, "Oh, great, they did that. Well, they have done that." No, and this is San Marcos, no, being taken by no, a tank of the police, and awful human rights violation. But people are like, yeah, they should have done that always. And I'm not saying people, everyone, no. So I'm also a neighbor, and I will raise my voice and start a little confrontation there. But something is going on, right? Why people don't identify with their peers? So you will say, because people who are skeptical about capitalism, me included, would like to think in terms of the good guys and the bad guys. And so why those who are excluded don't unite, right? And make the case to change the state of affairs against, well, I think it has to do with things that Maritza was mentioning, that some people have had progress, even little progress, but important progress. And that's why Lima votes for the right, because they feel they see stability, and we had this terrible 80s. Also, this is again fear to go back to the past, and it shapes our political economy, and this is weaponized by the right. So every time, and the next time that Veronica Mendoza appears in the political spectrum, they will say, "Oh, this is Venezuela, or again the bad era of terrorism." So that's how politics is played in Peru these decades, no? So that's pretty much the situation in Peru. And of course, this has structural features. And I was mentioning at the beginning political economy, so the economics and the politics of it. And Peru has managed to deal with some of the challenges of being a dependent country in terms of mineral dependence. So in terms of the macro indicators, we do well. But if we talk about the microeconomy, if some people are happy with the model, it's because there is some trickle down, right? And there is public works, and there is construction, and this is my university. As you can say, you can see there are plenty of new buildings. So the whole Lima looks like this, and then the capital cities, not only the capital cities. If you do mining and then you go to the municipalities of mining districts, you see public works. And that's the model. So the model is to manage the macroeconomy, and then you have trickle down, and you have public works expectation, and this creates a political resource course in terms of, well, maybe people say corruption. Well, yes, corruption, but this clientelar politics, no? This patrimonial way of thinking, this political economy of rentism. But it's not only the right. So and here is like you see all these commentators saying, "Oh, look at the left." It's not the left, as I see it. I think it's a popular uprising. But I don't see how, of course, the left always gets most of its votes in the South, but I think it's a popular uprising. But saying that, I also believe that it's not that necessarily people are against mining or against extractive industries. Yes, of course, people who live closer or who have been impacted by extractive industries. There are terrible cases, environmental, social, very, very bad, terrible cases. But as you know, environmental impacts are complex, are not immediate. There is a slow death, literally a slow death. If you are polluted or your children are poisoned by heavy metals, it's a slow death or a slow illness. It doesn't need to be everyone, no? And then it creates this awful politics of winners and losers. And people want to be a winner. And so there is this micro level rentism and this, so I know some literature will say, oh, this is neoliberal thinking. Well, maybe, no? It's extractivist thinking, but it's not, it's at the grassroots as well. So you could well have extractivism of the left. So now you have this sort of model imposed with the army and the police, and is quite racist, and he has killed so many Peruvians over the last weeks. But I mean, I think Vladimir Cerrón is not going to make it, but would things will be different with him in office? I think will be pretty similar. So, well, I will leave it there. Extractivism is part of the picture. Yes, it is. It's a shaping important part of the context. It has its economic, political, and environmental angles. and at the same time, there is more than that. No? And so the historical divide in Peru, the cleavage, Lima and the provinces, Lima and the rest of the country, the coast and the Andes, the coast and the whitened Peruvians, again, it's quite easy as the others. So it's a particular way of othering in Peru. All of that terrible mixture is part of what we are. And changing that is going to be difficult. And also because we have minerals. So we have minerals, prices are going to, this is where when I become like skeptical of thinking of easy answers, because prices are going to keep going up. Of course, there's always going to be cycles, ups and downs. That means crisis, cyclical crisis of the system. But prices will be still going up as technology develops. You can have small miners, small indigenous miners, as in the case of gold, for instance. So it looks like the extractivism is going to be part of our life as a society. And well, that's the structural challenge. Thank you. I will leave it there.
Thank you, José Carlos. Let me turn my camera on. Hi. Thank you so much for your presentations. I have a lot of notes. What I found very interesting that the three of you seems to have a very, well, I wouldn't say negative, but at least not very hopeful right now perspective of what is going on. Seems to be clear that you all want to stress that which is exactly what we made this call, right? That while what is going on now, it called the attention by the level of violence that we are seeing in the capital, in urban centers. This is not relatively new. There has been mobilization, there has been contestation, especially from disfranchising people in the South or in regions that are connected to extractivism. One thing that becomes more and more clear for me is that is a superposition of inequalities, right? Not only urban and rural level, but in terms of ethnic background, in terms of economical class, and connections to this perception of national state construction, as Maritza pinpointed. But what I found that also interesting to discuss, and I love that you brought it back, is that for a long time, and this is a general understanding in Latin America or even in any extractivist country, this myth of modernity that has been ingrained on the cultural and the social relations in our countries create a very difficult sense of collective mobilization into political or social change, or transform waves of protests into political organization to actually provoke change. And as Maritza mentioned, the perception of extractivism does not mean that all the protests have the same expectation on it. Like some of them reject, but other ones to negotiate, other ones to just have more improvement, other ones to just accommodate conflicts. This idea of that you mentioned, it's toxic for creating a collective. And I think that is, from the three of you, doesn't seem to be coming, you're not seeing maybe the moment as a window of opportunity for change. And I would like to know if I understand that different, or if there is a perspective from any of you, a perspective a little bit, yes, this can be a window of opportunity for change, and how to connect this dissatisfaction that has been anti-extractivism movement, questions of environmental disfranchising or environmental dislocation of people. This protest that Roger mentioned, this has been for a while. Violence and this imposition of emergency states in particular regions is not necessarily something absurdly new, has been there. Is there a window of opportunity of unifying the satisfactions with political disfranchisement or with the impeachment, with the fact that in 6 years there were 6 presidents, or you see that this moment is not going to be like reconnected? That would be my first question. Maybe if any of you want to take hold of it. And then I would like to, on my second question, I would return to Jose's final point of we have minerals, because I want to bring this discussion of maybe a new wave of resource boom that we may be coming with the discussion of the raw materials that we need for energy transition, particularly on the global north. But I would bring that to a second question. And then please, audience, we have already 2 questions, but please keep writing your questions. And after this round, I will start reading them. Anybody wants to start with my comment? No? Roger, please.
I think Jose Carlos have a hand up.
No, but it was just because. No, you can go.
Okay. No, I have just, the question is the more complicated one. Is this crisis can be an opportunity. I think we have normalized the idea of crisis in the last 6 years. We have like 6 presidents, 2 Congress, but also in the past. So at subnational level, as I show, this exceptional decrees that were not exceptional at all. So we have normalized the idea of crisis, and in my view, this is a structural issue. So we have extractive industry like a very historical institution from the colonial institution, mining, and then in the Amazon rubber and oil, and all the extractive industries. And the idea of the state was like a developmental state in the last century. But from the 90s with Fujimori, we have the idea of extractive industries connected to the global markets in more explicit ways. So this idea of global extractivism. And it's in this context that I think that it's important to understand the legacies of this particular moment and how to remove these legacies. And the only way, in my view, is to change the very constitutional structures of the country. So we need to talk about how to redefine the role of the state in this process, how to redefine the value of this sector of the society that we have no value at all. Because why social movements are fragmented, or why social movements are weak, formally weak, because they have no formed parties, because it's very costly to have a social movement. You can end in jail. This strategy of terruqueo, to say everybody's terrorist, so you can end in jail. So how you have incentives to do politics? So there is something that we have to think about. That is very difficult. And despite that, in the Castillo government, there was a progressive moment. One of the leading figures, anti-extractivist figures from the party, where there is a anti-extractive party, which is Tierra and Libertad, was the first minister of Castillo. Yeah, but it was a moment, a progressive moment, 2-3 months. So there are some opportunities, yes, there are some opportunities, and this social movement can articulate this demand for a new constitution, translate this politics to policy proposal, so there can be a change. But today, with this government that have decided to be full authoritarian, so that is really, really difficult.
Great, thank you, Carlos. Jose Carlos, want to jump in? You were with her.
Yeah, I guess there is no way to sound pessimistic when you when you do diagnosis of complex societies as the Peruvian, any Latin American, I think, society, because it's the legacy of exclusion, and it's always there. So, but then when we think as citizens, that's another. So you change, you put another cup and try to be more optimistic in the action, right? Of course, any crisis could be an opportunity, but I think for that you need always leaders. I'm not saying that the movements are not important or parties are not important. Of course, you do need the social fabric, which in Peru, because of the recurrent crisis and our political process, looks weak. It is indeed a weak political and social fabric, but at the same time, I will argue there is always the germen is there. It looks weak, but if the right alignment of forces and leadership happens, I think that could change. But today looks weak. It may look strong in a nearby future, but that cannot happen without leaders. And so, of course we are, it's like, okay, so here we have another guy calling for a caudillo or a caudilla in a country characterized by caudillos in all its political history, But it's difficult because if that is the game, it's hard to imagine a way out without such a strong force that somehow uses her charisma to make people believe in something different. Because what we have now is a total, like people don't believe on anything. So it's all the same. They are corrupt. They are all left and right. They are corrupt. They are all the same. So politics is of no use. So to build a way out it can be tricky, So that's my question, I guess, in thinking of ways out. But to be on the optimistic side, I do believe we have the social force, but it's latent. It's latent. And we need the process and the leaders to rebuild it. And again, being realistic, the other side of the problem of crisis, okay, crisis are opportunity, yes, but fear is again the feat of fascism. And so this has happened before. So we are living a new wave of global fascism. It's not only a Peruvian thing. It's all over Latin America, all over Europe, everywhere. And it's there, and it's an international, and they're gonna fight to think of each of our cases as a possibility to go against communism. So the people in Spain are gonna have Peru as a case, and money is gonna come. Not that the Peruvian faces need money, because they do have, but all the and they, because they see it as a competition, because there is the foro social, So that's another very important reason to be skeptical, or I don't know if the word is skeptical, pessimistic, but if that's something to be put on the table, to think about it, because if you want to do politics, you need to be aware that this is the global arena, the international arena at which you are now. No, it's not going to be easy.
Maritza, you would like to comment? We are receiving a lot of questions, so it's good I don't have to make too much more myself.
Yes, I think crisis is always an opportunity. The question is opportunity for what? And despite any solution we believe strongly on, I learned that how to carry out politically this solution is equally or even more important. So we can be sure about what is the solution, but the problem is the solution is viable, if it's possible to be carried out. And that can take time, can be quick, we don't know. That depends of many things, as Jose Carlos have mentioned. It's not only social movements, organizations, it's also leadership. Sometimes things that people cannot control, like context or just the moment. And perhaps it's more important the reading of the moment than the existence of actors, but how the actors read the moment and strategize accordingly to this moment. So I think right now we are with a lot of uncertainty, and I have faith and hope that I think is something going to be reading or has going to emerge from a fresh reading of the situation. I agree also that we have a very conservative context. And the question is, we can have aspirations, very progressive aspirations. The question is how you reach progressive aspirations in a context of a lot of conservadorism. As Jose Carlos said, it's not only in the elites, it's not only in the governments, it's also in the grassroots. So it's very complex. And the reading for me is the reading of the moment probably will tell us how much actors will make of this crisis an opportunity. That's for me. I'm not skeptical. I actually optimistic about this, but we need to wait.
Great. Thank you. Like, it was good to listen. Positive point of view of the three of you. So we have a lot of questions, and I'm going to start with the first one, which is very similar to the one that I have also, which is we are talking about, as Jose began, is this a crisis of the model? Are we seeing a crisis of the model? And at the same time, we in Extractivism project, we are discussing a lot about the new green material, the new green resources that will be needed for the energy transition. It is this sustainability from like a discourse much more from the north, and that will depend again of extraction of new resources that there are a lot of them on the south. So there is a question here, which is, do you think that the growing green extractivism, lithium and hydrogen are the examples presented here, will be politically like more of the conventional extractivism, so más de lo mismo, or do you observe any change in the dynamics, particularly with green hydrogen and its different production logics that builds on the expansion of renewable energies? And I would add up to this question, as it was not directed to anybody, so we can do, but we could maybe keep the answers a little bit shorter because there is more 6 questions here, and I would like to collect them. Do you see also a window of opportunity for Peru development, maybe a little bit away of this dependency of extractivism with this this rising sustainability, this new raw materials, or it's very possible that the country, as a lot of other Latin American countries, can also fall into a trap of just the new extractivism pathway. So if you could discuss a little bit more about this green resource and opportunities or even traps for Peru as a country that have those resources we know that it have already.
Okay, I have a very short answer. The answer is no, Peru is not going to be better with the green energy transitions. Just a short example, we have discovered lithium in the south of Peru. And when we ask the office in charge of provide concessions, to lithium concessions, if they have a plan to consult indigenous people in this area before promoting this whole lithium, they said that is not my competency. That is the issue of the other office that is next to me. So ask the other office. So they have no plan how to do this green extractivism and and even more how to connect this with new industrial processes or batteries. So there is no plan at all. They want to just to grant a lot of concessions, and this will generate a lot of social conflict as in the past. So that is the problem with it's not just with this government, but with the ideology that when I mentioned the Fujimori legacy, that is the ideology. It's like provide grant concessions everywhere, but with no state planning or state industry. So in Chile, they're discussing about to have a green state company or a Lula in Brazil. So there are some discussions. So that is not happening right now in Peru.
Yeah, very short as well. I think a good example that is going to be the same probably is what is happening with climate change policies right now in the Amazon, and conservation policies for carbon stocks are the same kind of platforms, no? Little consultation, little participation, taking the lands of indigenous little peoples without much participation of involvement of them, and using the same kind of models and forms that they are using for extractivism. So I don't see much change of chip, I will say, in the new green exploitation.
I guess
I want to jump in. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, it's hard to be optimistic in terms of to do something different. You need organization. You need the state apparatus. And so it's hard for Peruvians to imagine that because there is not that apparatus in place. And the history of the country and so on makes it. So if it happens in Peru, it might look more like in Argentina, where you have this scheme of treating lithium as just another mineral, compared to what the Bolivians are attempting to do, and the Chileans have been doing only since Bachelet II, because before that there was not these ideas of having a little bit more of state involvement. But then if you want to say, well, but let's be optimistic about it, it could be if the world attempts to go green, and then there is conditionality based on green standards and transparency standards. And so there is a extractive industries transparency initiative, but doesn't consider environmental issues. And of course, you will say that also taxation and bribes is, well, maybe taxation, but bribes is not part of transparency to our date. But if that sort of scheme of trade allowing for this sort of environmental conditionality, that could help if in your country you had some independent agency doing things. So, which is, you would say again, another reason to be pessimistic. Yes, another reason to be pessimistic, but still we have now with OEFA something much better than before. It was the Ministry of Mining. It was nothing of nothing. So still, well, that's the country. That's Peru.
Great. I'm gonna try to unify two questions, which are basically making questions of future alternatives. One of the questions begin: if Peru economic activity is focused on extractivism because of its rich natural resources, and it still continue having rich natural resources, how could the Peruvian society assure prosperity in the long term for the majority of the population. So it's focused on how can we discuss ideas of living better conditions, equal opportunity, high quality education, without discussing expanding extractivism, and also without, and then I see on the two comments are very critical on Peruvian politics right now, which is the lack of discussion on investments in infrastructure, technically assimilation, reinforcement of research and development, innovation, creation, competitiveness. We see one uniting with the other question is the lack of, or the lack, I don't understand if there's lack of ambition or historical failure of the Peruvian society to develop a vision of development that is a long-term and is pushing away from this idea of exploring raw materials and redistributing the money of selling those raw materials. And how can we balance this ambition of a society to have better qualities of life, but also promote these long-term development policies? And even one of the questions end with the phrase, right? Will someday Peruvian enterprises be competitive compared to the regional level? And they give the example of Chile, Colombia, and Brazil. I'm not sure if that is, I think that's the main ambition of both questions. So a discussion of what are the pathways to balance this short-term ambition, societal level of improving quality, and actually develop a project of getting more productive and less extractivist. And then I will read probably one more question and we can make final comments and wrap it up. So if you could be a little short in your comments about this, and yeah. Maybe we start on the invert, Jose, Maritza, and Roger.
All right.
I try to be short. I think having the resources makes the incentives for politicians to play the short-term game. So that's a structural problem of the country. And you are always going to have that, whether your country is right, center, or left. If you have the minerals and you have the prices, you are going to have this incentive structure to extract more, to have more resources to do your political project viable. So if you want to balance that, the liberal progressive will say, well, then you need some autonomy of regulatory agencies that are actually autonomous and say, well, you know, here, no way, because here is too risky. So forget about it. Oil in the Amazon, no. Oil here in the ocean here, where you have this, no. Around here, where there are so many people and the water system, too dangerous. So then you need this autonomy of some of regulatory agencies, and that it will not make it will not solve all the problems, but will make a less unfair dependencia model. It's always going to be dependent development because we are too small to decide. No, I mean, whether a copper or lithium is part of the global demand has nothing to do with Peru. So given that those are the rules of the game, the macro rules of the game, what you will need is something like this. I don't believe that it's going to be sort of some left-wing government is going to, I find it hard to imagine that. I mean, I know that President Petro is now saying that they are not going to exploit oil. I would like to see that if that happens, and how would that happen, if that could be sustained also over the long term. It's so hard to imagine, but maybe it's just that my imagination is constrained by the history of my country.
Well, Correa made the same promise. He didn't fulfill it. Yes, I think crisis must, to be productive and positive, must lead us to new arrangements first. And I think Roger was talking about that. I don't know if these will be constitutional new arrangements or other kind of new arrangements, but these new arrangements need to be based on political balance and power, need to be guarded by social and political power. If not, these new arrangements don't work. And in these new arrangements, I agree with Jose Carlos. I think autonomy for the state, better organizations, practical experimenting organizations need to be put in work in a context that we are dependent on natural resources, which are the cleverest ways to distribute, reduce inequalities on one side. But on the other side, I think also we need more representation, political representation. So these arrangements and this autonomy and these organizations cannot be just bureaucratic or technocratical. They need to be also involving people from communities, from the territories, because Peru is a very complex and diverse country, and one recipe doesn't really work for everywhere. And it requires more decentralization, real one, and capacity of listening what actors, local actors want for their lives and how they want to manage it.
I would like to add the importance of the battle of ideas. We have to remember that Peru is the most strong neoliberal regime in Latin America. We have 3 decades of neoliberalism, maybe with Humala, with some left initiative, but the idea of trickle down, idea of no state planning is very, very immersed in the technocracy, in the elites. So we need to engage with a battle of ideas to change these basic views of extractive industries as something that will automatically to provide prosperity. So there are some economists that say, okay, we can see now that we are very good in reducing poverty, so that everything is fine. So we need just to be technical and to provide capacities to subnational government, and everything will be fine. And that is not the case. So there is not only an issue of capacity building or something like that, but ideas, ideological ideas that are at the very fundamental of this, of our problems. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you for the answers. We have one interesting question that I believe that is the extractivism effect. That is less of a question, but more of a comment that is actually proposing this idea of further investigating and further expanding comparisons trans-regional. Unfortunately, something happened with my audio, right? Okay, sorry. The comment basically is actually proposing a comparison with Tunisia, between Peru and Tunisia, due to the attempts of dissolving parliaments and how the parliament seems to represent more of a blockage than an institutional that can do checks and balances, but more of a blockage that represents certain political elite that has been based. What is going on with my audio? But then in this idea of discussing democratic backsliding due to increasing of poverty and underperforming labor markets. So I found an interesting comment, and one of the benefits of our project is being able to do this cross comparison and having scholars from the Middle East watching our talks and so on and so forth. But my final comment, but from the questionnaire, is a question returning to the current scenario, like the protest in itself, the political crisis in itself. We see that the protests are asking the election this year. Parliament continues saying that this should not happen. So the question comes from this idea of what is possible vision of overcoming the situation of crisis, of the increased crisis in Peru right now, not only on violence, but also the lack of possibility of leadership, as Jose Carlos already mentioned. that can crystallize on demands and at the same time connect with economy and social powers that have historically been governing Peru. So how to recreate a scenario of bringing stability back, but is still provoking some level of change that it's necessary to overcome this crisis, not push it down and then let it happen again. And this is coming from a colleague of ours from Chile, which she made the question, could really a constitutional change be representative from the people who are today claiming for change? So I think the question comes from the Chilean experience already. And she's posing a specific question for Maritza. If you see the crisis of the estallidos in relation to the rest of the crisis in Latin America, do you think it's just part of the cycle or it is an isolated case? So maybe we make a comment on this and then we do a final round of conclusions so we can wrap it up our talk. Again, maybe as there was a specific question to Maritza, we begin from Maritza and then we go to Jose and Roger.
Okay, I was trying to think my answer, but okay, this is faster. I think it is part and it's not at the same time, sorry, but of the global or regional estallidos. Actually, I am working in a panel comparing Chile and Peru for this LASA, about estallidos, especially the participation of rural and territorial conflicts on these estallidos. So I think it's a very complex question because there are macro issues that are moving these estallidos and are involving different organizations, and also there are micro and very particular cases. Although I think Chile is always, this relates to your first question, Luisa, I think comparison is very needed right now because we need reference. And Chile is a good reference now, I think, although it's very distinct than Peru. I think the way that organizations work and the relation with political parties is quite different and allow us to understand, for example, how for the new constitutional process, many leaders from territorial movements were represented, but at the same time, they didn't agree necessarily on the constitutional measures, and how they behave also was very autonomous and independent of the left parties on the other side. So it's very interesting to compare what will happen in Peru, it will be similar or not, but I think it's part of it, it's part of this crisis, I think, of neoliberal extractivism, as Chile is also extractivist country, and is, I think, Latin America is an extractivist region, but at the same time, I think, although all movements are need to face repression and jail, but it's true, many are able to push arrangements furthermore than others, and I think we need to understand why and why not, and for that we need more comparisons. And it's true. I think we need to study more comparisons within the region and across other regions.
Yeah, well, I think also the Chilean mirror is always interesting to look to think of Peruvian political economy in the mirror of Chile, but this also can be a dangerous enterprise, no? Because you drawing comparisons and also in general drawing lessons from history is a intricate matter, no? Because it's like the constitutional process in Chile tells you a lot about the challenges, the possibilities, and the weaknesses of such an attempt, no? Because the referendum was not good news for those who wanted change, but still I think very optimistic with the overall process. So there you had a mobilized society, much more mobilized than the Peruvian one, particularly in the center, no? in Santiago vis-a-vis Lima. Although Lima does have its history of mobilization grassroots movements and the youth also in different ways. But again, it's like you have some of the elements, they don't look as strong, but still, if I think it could go either way. Also, in Chile, it could have gone either way. It went in this direction, but could have gone in another direction. So again, there is inevitability of change that progressives always have this feeling of we're on the right side of history. Yes, but sometimes history takes its time to materialize. So I cannot imagine a world without less inequality and more incorporation of peoples who are in the who have been excluded of the political, economic, cultural system. Yes, but that takes time, no? And so Peru has changed its constitution. Roger knows more about this, I think, of the three of us, maybe, because he's law expert. Peru has had many constitutions in his in modern life. So constitutions are not guarantee of anything, are more a reflection of a crisis, of a country living in continuous political crisis. But I do believe it's the only way out of this situation. Even in the, if I were a businessman, I think I will say this. It's the best way out to have a less unstable country. It is to take the debate out of the streets and of the violence and to make it political, as it should be. But unfortunately, I think the economic elites in Peru, they don't read books. They don't go outside, or when they go out, I don't know what they do, but they look so, I don't know, so self-contained in its WhatsApp chats, you know. So like, I think it was the wife of Piñera, no? That these circles of ignorance. So you can be wealthy, but you are ignorant, and I think that happens in Peru a lot, I'm afraid.
Yeah, some general ideas about to share with you is that constitutions in Peru always has been enacted with previous elites with the power to define the process. So the elites or caudillos, yes, authoritarian leaders, they defined the process to arrive to a new constitution. In Peru, the social movement, indigenous movement, rural population have never pushed for a constitution. So that is something that never happened. That is why I think the key issue here is a democracy demand. So they are claiming for more democracy to be equal in this process, this fundamental discussion. And there are some strategic ideas of say, okay, but the people are conservative, so we shouldn't discuss a new constitution because in the end we will have a more conservative constitution. So, but that is not the issue. The issue is democracy. Is to say, okay, we need to talk about it, to discuss in public deliberation. That is my key answer to that. And in relation to Chile, and that we don't know what is going to happen in Chile. The approval of the project was not possible. One of the key issues was the idea of plurinationalism. So the people rejected, the majority rejected that Chile should recognize indigenous nations. So that is one of the key issues in Chile. And in Peru, it could be the same, but with a big difference that we have much more indigenous people. We have already indigenous nations recognized as such at the margin of the states. So they say we are nations, so we are autonomous. We have now in Peru, and nobody is talking about it. And this indigenous nations and organizations, they are claiming for a new constitution. So we need to be open to these discussions and to do more comparison. I agree with this experience to understand how we can find a solution to this situation.
Okay, thank you so much for your comments. I will make a final comment, and if you want to wrap up on my comment, or we can wrap up immediately. Is first of all, I should thank you three for participating, and for the audience, which was quite huge and international when I was looking now. So it's cool that we are reaching different audiences. And I would like again to reinforce this idea that is the idea of our project, which is to promote cross-historical, cross-regional, and trans-regional comparisons in order to understand this idea of this levels of patterns and permanences that are created by the extractivism development model, and how it creates obstacles but also opportunities for changes. And maybe the changes are too slow on the historical path, as Jose mentioned, but maybe the changes are becoming more and more visible. And it is interesting that this idea, I'm using here my notes from Maritza, that we should understand the many legacies of extractivism, pre-neoliberalism, after neoliberalism, and how this creates a dynamic of a complex. You use complex of demands, but I would also say a complexity of inequalities between the relations of society and politics. And I would say that this, while it is visible in Peru, is visible in so many other countries of the global south that got this position into the provider of resources for the global north. And we are now maybe discussing a change on the shift of how is going to be these resources. And this can create new winners, new losers. And we are in a very interesting moment of start comparing and discussing. But then again, becomes what Roger is insisting, we should not just talk about the state level or what is a nation, and always focusing on the many other reasons of mobilization and ambitions, that we are not just talking about this poverty alleviation of the indigenous or the poorer communities, but actually talking about development in a more sane way, right? Like development as freedom and ability of choosing what you want to. So I think this is a very interesting way of bringing our discussion further to an end. If you have any other further points, please join in. I don't know, anybody has any other comments on it? I'll wrap it up point.
No, just thank you. Thank you for the invitation and my colleagues' comments. Very enriching always to talk with them.
Yes, in my case also, I would like to thank you, Luisa and Extractivism. You are doing a great job, and hope to keep in touch to still discussing these issues.
Thank you as well. The question about Tunisia kept on my head. I don't know about Tunisia, but this I do share the idea that maybe the biggest challenge for resource-rich countries, resource-abundant, mineral-abundant countries, is that the risk of authoritarian politics, because you do need this force to make your political project viable. So it's like having the resources can be a challenge for society itself, and that's maybe the most important challenge, as I can see.
Definitely, I'm completely in line with this approach, that any discussions of, and that's a term that we have been using a lot in our project when we are discussing energy transition, is the idea of dark sides of sustainability, and that one of the main dark sides, slippery slope, is the discussion of authoritarianism, how authoritarianism and having or not having a strategic resource are very much interlinked. And we see that a lot in the Middle East, but we see that a lot in Latin America, and that's why our project has been going back and forward on those discussions. So I would recommend strongly to keep in touch with our production. We are doing a lot of events, publications, flying academies, and policy briefs, occasional papers, all on our website. And we're trying to bring fellows from both sides. Roger was one of our fellows on our first cohort. He came here to Kassel. And we're about to receive a new fellow cohort now to discuss coalitions. And I hope it's going to be extremely profitable, as was the first. We have, doing a little bit of advertising, we have a newsletter, and I would strongly suggest to follow it and like to register to our newsletter and follow us on Twitter, and you can be connecting. We are going to have a flying academy in Tunisia, and I really hope maybe this comparison between Tunisia and Peru comes back, because I also find interesting, not necessarily my topic, but I found it interesting. I'm curious now about this comparison. So yeah, just again, thank you very much. We completely overdid our timing. I hope it was fine for you, and thank you very much. As I mentioned, our session is recorded. We're going to put online soon on our YouTube page, also social media. You could follow us, and hope we can keep this discussion in touch and alive. And yeah, thank you very much.